Hello students, welcome to this particular segment. In this segment and those following it, we'll be dealing with Shelley and Shelley's poems. Today in this first video of the series, I'll be talking about P.B. Shelley, the life of Percy Bysshe Shelley, introducing him for you. And if we have time in this segment, we'll start with our analytical reading of Ozymandias. Now, as you know, Percy Bysshe Shelley was a major second-generation romantic poet, and he was born in August 1792 and he passed away in 1822. Another poet with a very short life. Now let me tell you a very small anecdote from my own experiences. Once I was talking, it was my good luck that I happened to be fortunate enough to talk to one very well-known and internationally famed actress of the yesteryears. She's quite aged now, and she was telling me that her life has been very turbulent, and quite jocularly she said that perhaps it is because I was born in the year 1942, which was the year of the Quit India movement, the year of a revolution. Shelley could also claim a similar year of birth, because only a few days after his birth, on the 10th of August 1792, a very important thing happened in the events that led up to the French Revolution, and it was the storming of the Tuileries Palace in France. Again in 1793, 21st January 1793, we have the historical execution of Louis XVI. All these are to some extent things linked, as you can understand, with the French Revolution. And Shelley was in fact almost a kind of a person who can be described as born with a kind of a revolutionary ferment in his character. His father's name was Timothy, and Shelley was a disobedient child right from his childhood. He went to Eton College. He was bullied over there by most of his classmates. They called him Woman Shelley because perhaps he was a bit effeminate. But Eton College provided him knowledge of classical poetry, and he got very interested in modern scientific innovations. And even at in his brief sojourn in the University College, Oxford, after that, he researched in chemistry. And there's a historian who in fact feels that had Shelley been a chemist, he would have been as famous and as illustrious as Newton in his own field. One very important aspect of Shelley's poetry is his deeply scientific precision of nature understanding. Perhaps he owes it to his interest in science, which particularly developed during his Eton days and his Oxford days. However, the Oxford days were short-lived because he, as you know, most of you know, was expelled from Oxford for publishing a pamphlet called The Necessity of Atheism. You will be a little interested about it, and it is to some extent also relevant in our study of Ozymandias. Shelley does not so much find a kind of a ethical necessity of atheism, but for him atheism is a logical necessity. In the necessity of atheism, he says that there are three sources of belief. The first is evidence of the senses. The second is, obviously, in evidence of the senses, he is indebted to Locke and his empiricism. The second is reason. That is also a source of belief. The causal connection that we can testify with our reasoning ability. And the third, he says, is testimony of others. According to him, religion is not evident by the senses. Spirituality is not evident by the senses. It does not fall within the ambit of rational reasoning. And importantly, the testimony of others, he feels, is deceived to some extent. What we can call in existential term false faith. So these are the grounds that he provides for abjuring religion and embracing atheism. And in those days, Oxford University was pretty rigid on these issues, and he was expelled from Oxford. In 1811, only when he was 19 years old, he met and married Harriet Westbrook. And about the same time, he struck up correspondence with William Godwin, a very well-known radical political philosopher of his time, with his very well famed work called Inquiry Concerning Political Justice. Eventually, he eloped with Godwin's daughter, Mary Wollstonecraft, who was herself a political philosopher. Without going through the divorce with Harriet, they started living together. She took the name Mary Shelley, while Shelley was still married to Harriet, and as a result, Harriet committed suicide. And it was a very complicated situation because despite Godwin's disliking of the elopement, Godwin was dependent on Shelley for money, so nothing much could be said. Well, he came to Italy later in his life via France and Switzerland. And in 1816, they were confined in a palatial building, he and his friends, including Byron. And there was a ghost story competition, the result of which is the famous Frankenstein, written by Mary Shelley, who was Mary Godwin before the elopement. And Shelley actually wrote the preface to Frankenstein. Shelley's lifelong interest is in a kind of a cultural political revolution. He was a vegetarian and he wrote on vegetarianism. He has to his credit a very well-known drama called Cenci, C-E-N-C-I. The pronunciation would be Cenci. A lot of lyric poems. One of them, of course, Ozymandias is not a lyric poem. It's a narrative sonnet. It tells a story. Novels as well. And indeed a lot of political commentaries. Shelley was a person who wanted to change the world. But unlike another luminary in the field of politics, Milton, who actually entered politics, Shelley wanted to change the world by writing. So his writings are always inspired by the Revolutionary War. There's a work called The Triumph of Life, which remains unfinished at the end of his career. And as I've told you, he died in 1822 by drowning. That's a brief sketch of Shelley's life. We'll get to know more about him when we read some representative poems by him. The first poem that we are going to read is Ozymandias, which is a very well-known poem. Ozymandias was written in 1818. In fact, all the poems that we are reading till now, we did 2 poems by Keats. All of them are dated 1818 till now. Of course, it will change when we do the West Wind, which we'll do after this. I will read the poem first, and in the next segment we'll start reading it line by line and trying to understand it between the lines. Ozymandias. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." Now, Ozymandias was written in, as I told you, in 1818, and the name obviously refers to Ramesses II, whom you find as a very important character in the book of Genesis. The book of Exodus, who had this conflict with Moses. And Ramesses II lived from between 1279 to 1213 BC. Now, how many syllables are there in Ozymandias? Ozymandias. It's a pentasyllabic word today. Shelley, however, obviously pronounced it as a 4-syllabled word, and that's the way in which he metrically uses it. What's the meaning of the word Ozymandias? Why did he use that particular word? Another name, the alias of Ramesses. Ozy in Greek means air, and Mandius means ruler. So he is the ruler of everything around. That's the meaning of the name. But now, of course, the name takes a kind of a. If you understand the poem, you will realize that the name takes a kind of a ironic significance, because Ozymandias' statue, that is the subject of the poem, has nothing to rule but the air around it. It has lost all authority, all power, as it happens with all rulers. So what does it say? I met a traveller from an antique land who said, so there is someone who actually told him the story. So at the beginning you find that he is to some extent distancing himself from the narrative. It has been said by someone else. Not only that, it brings in a kind of a narrative innovation, The poet becomes the frame narrator, and the traveler is a real narrator, the person who actually tells the story. We'll carry on our understanding of this poem in the next segment.